Here's all the changes coming in 14.11. Firstly, there's the return of Reaper with buffs to Kayn, Yone and Grim Harvest. Trickshot will also be making a comeback with the revert to the trait's damage and buffs to Sivir. Then a Reroll is also seeing great buffs through Senna, Aatrox and potentially Gnar, but unlikely. There's also buffs to Arcanists like Syndra and Lissandra, but that's also coming with mana nerfs to Wardens like Garen and Nautilus. But there's a lot more to cover, like the changes to items and augments. But before we get into everything, I'd greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. But let's start with the unit changes. Firstly, there's this buff to Kayn, which to me heralds his return. Kayn will have a lot more HP, especially when combined with other sources of armor and damage, like through items or traits like Heavenly. Alongside Kayn, there's also buffs to Yone and Kha'zix, but only at 3-star. Now, there's a very particular comp I've been trying to play more of in this patch, and that is Reaper Alune. But for the life of me, I cannot find more Reaper spats. Anyway, from what I have managed to try, the true damage output on this board is absolutely bonkers. I went fast 9 with Alune in my game, but there's also the potential of rerolling Yone and Alune alongside Thresh. To me, this comp has a lot of potential next patch, but do bear in mind that my experience with it is extremely limited due to my abysmal Augment RNG. That aside, there's also this buff to Yasuo, which is more impactful in Duelist as he'll gain more attack speed to then apply his passive on-hit magic damage more often. So this buff does make Yasuo a slightly better item holder for units like Volibear or Diana, but I still don't think Yasuo 3 is worth going for. Although that could just be extreme bias due to how poorly some of my Yasuo 3 games went, if I even hit Yasuo 3. Anyway, speaking of Diana, she's also seeing a buff in this patch, which is seemingly intended to make Diana more impactful at 3-star, especially as a tank. Now, this buff does actually favor high attack speed comps like Duelist and Vertical Dragonlord, which is due to Diana dealing more damage with her autos and healing more through Sage, but mostly due to how Diana will be casting more with high attack speed. As Diana will have so much damage reduction during her ult channel, she won't be gaining as much mana from tanking unless you're facing very high burst. With more attack speed, Diana can keep generating mana, chain ulting and maintaining her ult's damage reduction. And if you look at Diana 3's top 10 highest played comps right now, you can see the highest win rate comps are all Duelists. So I presume this Diana buff will be the most impactful to Vertical Duelist if you give her the Duelist spat. Duelist will give Diana the most attack speed and some damage reduction on top. At a Duelist, that damage reduction is 18% outside of Diana's ult, but during her ult channel, that becomes 47% damage reduction. And that is not including the effects of Diana's resistances or otherwise. And it's easy to reroll Diana with Volibear and Tristana because they are all of the same cost. But of course, this buff to Diana is only relevant if you 3-star her, which can be difficult to do if she's contested or there are no other 3-cost rerollers in your lobby. However, the buffs to Diana and Yasuo do come alongside a nerf to Darius, wherein his AoE damage is getting reduced at 1 and 2-star. Now Darius is slightly worse as an item holder and should fall off sooner, but he's still good. I'll also mention a buff to another item holder, which is Sivir, who's seeing a buff at 3-star. I am not currently aware of any Sivir reroll comps, so I don't think this will be that impactful outside of Builder Bud perhaps. But moving on, let's talk about these buffs to Aatrox, Senna and Gnar. Now the most impactful buff is certainly to Senna, where her ult's AD ratio is increasing as well as granting more AD. So combined with the buffs to Ghostly and Sniper last patch, Senna reroll hits really hard right now. Although these buffs to Aatrox aren't really anything special. As I remarked in a previous patch preview, Aatrox at most is a secondary carry to others that have multi-target abilities like Zyra, Senna, Teemo and Riven. From what I've played of Aatrox reroll, his sustain and single target is decent, but he still gets stuck on tanks. If you want to try Aatrox reroll, I've had the most success with BT, Crown Guard and Adaptive Helm. Those items are great for Aatrox, but if you don't hit Aatrox 3, then you can easily transfer them over to Sylas. Anyway, there's also these buffs to Gnar, where his passive can now stack up to 45 instead of 40. This buff is nice, I guess, but it's not a game changer. Although, truthfully, I am a Gnar hater. I just do not like playing Gnar. This buff could be huge for him, but I'm just so biased against him. But I do love Arcanists, who are seeing some love in this patch. Firstly, Syndra is losing one starting Butterfly, but in return, her AP ratios are going up. Now, there's actually a nerf at 1-star, but at 2-star, it's neutral if Syndra has no AP. Once you start giving Syndra AP, her ult ramps up in damage faster than it did before. Similarly, Lissandra's ratio is also going up, which is kinda crazy because now a 6 Arcanist 2-star Lissandra will hit each unit for almost 2000 damage per ult without any items. So with the amount of AP you can get from Vertical Arcanist, both Syndra and Lissandra are outputting much more damage. As part of this video and now another video I'm working on, I took a look at the best players of Arcanist. I found 6 high elo accounts, all of which have had good success with Arcanist. I'll link all of these profiles in the description as I'd recommend a glance. But generally, they find more success playing 6 Arcanists with 4 Porcelain rather than playing 4 Warden. But a huge win condition is hitting a Arcanist, which is not that difficult as all you need is 1 spat. Initially, I was under the impression that the frontline from the 4 Wardens was essential, however it seems that just Amumu and Alawi are enough, especially since all that AP allows them to both tank a ton with more healing and bigger shields. I mean, Nautilus is also getting a 10 mana nerf in this patch, so his casting frequency and CC output is much lower for the same reasons I mentioned earlier with Diana. This nerf to Nautilus is good for melee carry comps like Reapers and Duelists. But despite that, I do not like this nerf to Nautilus, because it hits Warden and Mythic harder than it does his best performing comp, which is Dragonlord Sage Lillia. Naut's casting frequency is extremely high in this comp due to the attack speed from Wukong and Dragonlord, and this mana nerf to Nautilus doesn't really address that. The better solution here would have been to reduce his base attack speed rather than increase his max mana. Anyway, by playing 4 Porcelain, Lissandra, Lux and Amumu can cast far more often and output much more damage. And through Porcelain, you are less dependent on hitting 3 stars like Zoe, as Lux and Lissandra can pull some extra weight. But Amumu 3 still seems crucial. Anyway, from these profiles, I've inferred that Arcanist loves spats like Warden, Porcelain and, well, Arcanist. Of course, an Arcanist spat will allow you to hit a Arcanist, but with a Warden spat you can easily play 4 Warden, and with a Porcelain spat you can drop Ashe to again play 4 Warden. But overall, the late game of Arcanist is stronger, and as demonstrated by the high elo players, Vertical Arcanist is viable. Now, the last direct nerf is part of a few nerfs to hero augments. That being this mana nerf to Garen with a buff in 14.10 is being reverted. But there's also a nerf to Kobuko's Lucky Paws hero augment where his damage bonus is getting reduced down to 225%. Anyway, these nerfs are good because hero augments are literally some of the highest win rate augments in the game right now. But comparatively, that Garen nerf is much more impactful since Garen will be casting less, again for the same reasons as Nautilus and Diana, which in turn means he scales slower during combat. On the other hand, Kobuko scales outside of combat and will still be casting loads, especially with his mana buff in 14.10. It's just that his damage has slightly decreased, but it's still enough to farm you plenty of gold, particularly in the early game. Based on the 1 Lucky Paws game I had on the PBE, I don't think this augment is drastically weaker. However, again, my sample size is small because across the past few days on PBE, I've only managed to get a hero augment that 1 time. Now, moving on to other augments, there's also a buff that built different too, where the health and attack speed it grants will be greater, although the stage 2 health bonus will remain the same. I forgot this augment was in set 11. I have not seen it at all in a considerable amount of time, although maybe this buff will change that. Similarly, there's also this buff to Grim Harvest where the augment grants 1% more Omnivamp per takedown as well as granting a Yone instead of a Kha'zix. From what I've played, this augment feels great with the other buffs to Reapers. Anyway, both Dragonlord Crown and Porcelain Crown are also getting the units they granted changed. Porcelain Crown will grant an Amumu instead, while Dragonlord Crown will grant Janna alongside Diana. Lastly, some augments are getting nerfed. Few Healthy will be less healthy as it grants 9 less HP per unique 2-cost champion, and Venerable Piggy Bank will be granting 1 less gold if you lose combat, which is good because the sheer amount of gold you could get from this augment was just silly. There's also changes to 2 support items and an artifact. Firstly, Moonstone Renewer is getting a nerf where it grants 40 less shield at every stage, which is 80 less in total since it affects 2 allies. It's still a very good support item, but it won't be nearly as cracked as it was before, especially early game. Next up, Needlessly Big Gem is getting a 50 HP buff, which is nice I guess. Lastly, Diamond Hands is losing 100 HP, but it still grants gold and invulnerability, so it's still a very consistent artifact, especially when you compare it to some of the others. And finally, there's 2 trait buffs this patch. Firstly, Trickshot is getting reverted to its 14.9 values, which I like to be honest. Bruiser Kaisa has become a staple comp in set 11 and 14.10 did not treat it well. But there's also a buff to 8 Ghostly where each Spectre will grant 4% more damage amp. And for the most part, that is it. There are some more changes coming this patch like a new Ezreal Chibi and this cool new glow on legendary units when they're in your shop. However, there was a brief time where crits appeared as yellow for some reason. I'm not sure if this was due to full report or if it's just some sort of weird bug. Anyway, it's looking like Duelist will become a very popular comp in this patch due to all the recent discussion around Challenger 1 tricks. Rodan has an amazing guide on how to play Duelist that I highly recommend you watch as it's incredibly insightful as always. But in this patch there's also a noticeable lack of Sage Dragonlord Lillia nerfs, which is a concern for me. But yeah, with that, let me pass over the questions to you guys. What do you think of this patch? Were there enough changes for you, or is this perfect? Are you going to try out Vertical Arcanist, and is there any potential for Yasuo or Sivir reroll? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.